So I heard this story about this preacher who dreamed that he was preaching, and he woke up and he was. So if that happens today, it's because we, along with almost 70 other people from the St. Paul's community, were out doing the Pride Parade last night. It was first of all, I was telling Tom, I was amazed at how many faith-based groups there were there. Even a synagogue with a release of quote had a menorah on it. I'm assuming they were not a conservative. I mean, an Orthodox. Yeah. But it was amazing, and I'll tell you one of the genius things about what happened is that Natalie, one of our clergy here, took a lot of the little kids from Fay Esperanza, and they were going out handing things out, and they just won the crowd's heart. They got such wonderful response, and I am so glad that St. Paul's is a diverse, inclusive community that can allow that kind of thing to happen. Covenant had a group there. They were there. I got to go talk to them. They were, yeah, I was there. Lutheran Church was there. The Humanist Society was there. You know, the one that says good without a God. That's their God. So they were there. It was a wonderful thing, and so grateful for Jennifer West, who does the work that she does here. So you know about the concern cards and about the email sign-up cards, and I want you to know also how grateful I am for you, and I want you to know that no matter who you are, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, you're welcome here. So I am calling this talk today, Problems to be Solved, Miracles to be Lived. So that will give you an idea of the territory we're going to cover. This is a 2-point talk, not 3 points and a point. 2 points. Just 2 points. I have loved problem solving all of my life. And this has been true from the very beginning. I think it's a given of my particular personality types. I have loved it also when secrets were involved. I love secrets. I think that's one of the things that led me to developing an interest in magic. I can remember as a very small child sitting in my daddy's lap, and he would do a magic trick that I think was called Jack and Jill or Bob and Charlie. I'm not sure which. Didn't matter. Maybe the names changed. But I would sit in his lap, and he took a piece of newspaper and wet it and stuck it to the fingernail of each finger. You know this trick? And I would be sitting there watching him, and he said, all right, now this is Jack and this is Jill. And he'd say, fly away, Jack. And his hand would come down, and Jack would be gone. And he'd say, fly away, Jill. And his hand would come down, and Jill would be gone. Come back, Jack. His hand would come down, and Jack would be back. Come back, Jill. And he'd pull his hand down, and Jill would be there. Don't tell anybody how that worked. It took me years to figure out the secrets of that. Fly away, Jack. Fly away, Jill. You do that over and over. That may be the first magic trick I ever saw. Do what?
We want to see it. We've never seen it.
Do what?
Jack and Jill.
I don't have any newspaper. And decided I can't put you all in my lap. I'll figure it out about next week. Edward Harris gets on me every week and asks me to do a magic trick in here. And so I was going to do a card trick for you. And not a full deck. I've never been accused of playing with a full deck. I have, but this is for you. And anybody can observe and participate if you want to, but I'm calling this the Edward Harris Miracle Card Trick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 6 cards. And I want you just to think of one. Don't tell me what it is. The best thing to do is when you see the card up here, just decide on the card, focus on one, got it? Say it to yourself over maybe 3 times. You got that card? You got that card? You sure? That's a miracle. I think I've shared with you all before that the journey that led me to being right here today began with as a small child, being afraid of the dark. And my brother, who was 6 years older than me and mean to me, made fun of me for being a scaredy cat and frightened of the dark. And I knew that other people were not afraid of the dark, and I wanted to know what they knew that I didn't know that would help me not to live with that kind of anxiety. Now, looking back on it, if one of my children, I've got 2 adult children, if one of my children had been involved reading the kind of books that I was reading when I was 11, 12, 13 years old, I would have said, there's something not right about this. I was reading, both my father and mother were highly educated people. We had a lot of books in our house. And I was reading books, psychological and theological, religious, on peace of mind, when I was very young. I read Paul Tillich when I was 13 years old. I'm serious. And his collection of writings that contained the famous passage on the courage to be, I read when I was 15. And in case you've never heard that passage, I want to read it to you. It's not what this talk is about, but you need to know this passage. Paul Tillich was professor at Union Seminary, and when he then went to Harvard, and when I got to go to Harvard, I studied with Gordon Kaufman, who was Paul Tillich's successor. And anyway, that's a whole nother story. Here's the Tillich quote: "You are accepted by that which is greater than you, and the name of which you do not know. Do not ask for the name now. Perhaps you will find it later. Do not try to do anything now. Perhaps later you will do much. Do not seek for anything. Do not perform anything. Do not attend anything. Simply accept the fact that you are accepted. If that happens, we experience grace. After such an experience, we may not be better than before, and we may not believe more than before, but everything is transformed. In that moment, grace conquers sin, and reconciliation bridges the gulf of estrangement, and nothing is demanded of this experience, no religious or moral or intellectual presupposition, nothing but acceptance." I think it's one of the most beautiful paragraphs in English language. And you can see how it shaped my own theology and my own teaching. There's nothing we can do to be. We're going to talk some more about courage before we're done today, but I am still plumbing the depths of this amazing paragraph, profound paragraph, developing the courage to be who you truly are. Now, it has been like for me, opening a box of magic tricks complete with secrets, to be in on what the scholars have called the third search for the historical Jesus. When I went to graduate school, I had no interest in this whatsoever. I knew about it, but I just wasn't interested in it. My passion at that time was the business of being a real person. I got that phrase from German theologian Rudolf Bultmann and the American liberal preacher Harry Emerson Fosdick, who has a strange influential connection with St. Paul's, but that's a whole other story. Rudolf Bultmann, German theologian, and I'm going to paraphrase what Bultmann said. By the way, Bultmann died not all that long ago in 1976, which for me is not all that long ago. Bultmann said, if people reject the gospel of Jesus Christ, don't let it be because they are rejecting an outmoded three-storied universe with heaven, earth, and hell. But let it be because they have heard Jesus' clear call to come into authentic existence, and they are either accepting or rejecting that. Wow. Not about believing, it's about being authentically involved in life. And then, or about the same time, I discovered Harry Emerson Fosdick, who was doing what I dreamed of doing and what I get to do right now. He was putting together insights from the relatively new field of psychology and bringing them to the pulpit, buttressed with biblical insights. And he said that the challenge that we had was that of being a real person. Again, wow. So these two guiding stars, authentic existence and being a real person, that was enough for me. I had it. And when I got discovered in graduate school by the writings of Carl Jung, and the fact that my first spiritual teacher was a Buddhist, I had more material than I could deal with in my lifetime. I mean, it was just absolutely wonderful. Psychology and religion, spirituality together, that was my path. And I was having, and still am, a wonderful time doing that. But it was set. And I followed it faithfully until 9/11. I knew about the fundamentalists. I had seen them destroy the denomination that birthed me, but it didn't affect me. By that time, I was already giving talks on don't be trapped by labels. Don't let a label, Baptist, Methodist, Christian, whatever, trap you. I knew at that time about what at that time was the fledgling Jesus seminar. I had skimmed things like the Gospel of Thomas. I was interested in increasing spiritual literacy, not religious literacy. There's a difference. The fact is that religious illiteracy is killing us. Not just blowing people up, but the divisive, hateful rhetoric that is everywhere. What has happened to kindness and compassion and being non-judgmental? So when I began to do my homework on what was really going on in Jesus and biblical studies, it was like finding another wonderful box of toys. Now I'm going to use the teaching that we're up to in the Gospel of Thomas today as a delightful problem to be solved, and then we'll talk about it as a miracle to be lived. They showed him a gold coin and said, Caesar's agents demand a tribute from us. He said to them, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's, and give me what is mine. Now those of you who have attended church regularly, or read the Jesus narratives have more than likely heard this teaching in one form or another. It has been used to justify everything from separation of politics and religion, Caesar, God, to financial campaigns during the church's fall financial drive. Give to God what is God. So that the radical, explosive nature of this teaching gets overlooked. In Robert Funk's narrative of the Jesus story, he puts this incident where this teaching is right before Jesus is captured, gone through a mock trial, and executed. This was the tipping point of this teaching. Now this thing is found in 5 different places. So you know there's fire there somewhere. It's found here in Thomas. It's found in Mark, Matthew, Luke, and it's found in the Egerton Gospel. Now you have likely not heard of the Egerton Gospel, but in 1935 a group of papyrus manuscripts was sold to the British Museum, and among them were fragments now referred to as the Egerton Gospel, and the scholars say that this is currently the oldest surviving fragment that we have from any version of the Jesus story. Older than Mark, older than Thomas. Now, this is interesting to me. This is not a secret, I think, that's just fascinating. When the scholars find a saying like this that's repeated 5 times, but different in each the way it's done, they call it a performance. You understand? Jesus wrote the music, and then Mark performed it, and Thomas performed it, and Matthew performed it, and they all performed it differently for their own particular purposes. So here's a problem to be solved. What does this saying or teaching of Jesus mean? He's asked a question. He does not answer it. This is characteristic of him. He does not say that they should or should not pay the tax. He asks them to solve it themselves. The issue at stake here is who really has the claim on you. I think that this teaching, when you look at it in all its performances, is one of the funniest and cleverest and most shocking things to come out of the mouth of Jesus. It's offensive. Jews, especially Jewish leaders, were not supposed to have any graven images about them. So here they come to Jesus with this question about taxes. Should we pay them or not? Now, if he says, yes, you should pay taxes, he's going to offend his base. And because he's agitating against the Roman Empire, so he would not say pay taxes. And if he says, no, you should not pay taxes, that's treason. So they had it, they thought. George Phillips, who was an elderly man from Meridian, Mississippi, 3 years ago was going to bed when his wife told him that he'd left the light on in the tool shed in the garden. She could see it from her bedroom upstairs. So George opened the back door to go turn off the light. But what he saw were people there stealing things. So he went back inside and informed the police, and they told him what was happening. Somebody's in my tool shed stealing things. And the police said, is anybody in your house? He said, no, but there are people breaking into my garden shed and stealing from me. And the police said, all the patrols are busy. You should lock your doors, and an officer will be along when one is available. So George said, okay. Hung up the phone and counted to 30. He phoned the police again, and he said, hello, this is George Phillips. I just called you a few seconds ago because there were people stealing things from my shed. You don't have to worry about it now because I just shot them. And he hung up. And within 5 minutes, there were 6 police cars, a SWAT team, a helicopter, 2 fire trucks, a paramedic, and an ambulance showed up at his residence. They caught the burglars red-handed, and one of the police officers said to George, "I thought you said you shot them." George said, "I thought you said nobody was available." There's a moral to that. Don't mess with old people. And the moral here is, don't mess with Jesus. I want to read to you the way Eugene Peterson renders this story. They sent some Pharisees and followers of Herod to bait him, hoping to catch him saying something incriminating. They came up and said, "Teacher, we know you have integrity, that you are indifferent to public opinion. Don't pander to your students and teach the way of God accurately. Tell us, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" He knew it was a trick question. And said, "Why are you playing a game with me? Bring me a coin, let me look at it." They handed him one. Now you get that. If they were good Jews, they wouldn't have had a graven image with them. This engraving, who does it look like and whose name is on it? Caesar, they said. Jesus said, "Give Caesar what is his, and give God what is God's." And their mouths hung open, speechless. Now, there are a lot of things that get in the way of our hearing a teaching like this, and solving the problem of seeing how close we can get, not only to Jesus, but what Jesus has to teach us. For one thing, we aren't Jewish. And we aren't in the demographic that Jesus spoke to and appealed to. All of us, your teacher included, are very involved in and affected by the kind of government Jesus preached against, and which killed him. It is, however, impossible to read the teachings of Jesus and fail to see his consistent, clear bias toward the poor and the outsider, those at the bottom and those marginalized. For Jesus, there were some non-negotiable issues: justice for those who had no power, and generosity toward the poor and the outsider. That's why I have taken to encouraging you, no matter what belief system you choose to locate yourself in or what rituals you choose to practice, to make your religion one of kindness, compassion, and generosity. The Christian movement, especially in this culture, has made it easy for people to become what I call cafeteria Christians. You just go through the line and take what you want, leave the rest there. Like you take sexual orientation issues and make that primary and leave other stuff. And that allows us to divert our attention from what Jesus did not divert his attention from, and ask his followers not to divert their attention from. One of Jesus' sayings says, "You strain out gnats, but you swallow camels." And again, Peterson renders that this way: "Do you have any idea how silly you look writing a life story that's wrong from start to finish, nitpicking over commas and semicolons?" So Jesus was determined to serve no other than the God he had come to know, and he calls people to follow him. He both taught and demonstrated giving to God what belonged to God and not giving it to the government. He said that ultimate allegiance and devotion, a passion for love and justice, his hope and vision did not belong to the state, and it was for that he was executed. Now, in the time of Jesus, the empire was an ideology that affected all of life. It was the glue that held life together. It was the glue at that time that really held the so-called civilized world together. The emperor was worshipped. Nothing critical could be said about him. The people at the emperor's level came from the wealthiest and most influential of families. At the top level, it was, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. Aren't you so glad we've gotten away from that sort of thing in our life? So the emperor was called divine, Son of God, God, Lord, Redeemer, Savior of the world. Any of those terms sound familiar? What caused the early followers of Jesus with so much difficulty is that in accordance with teachings of his that, like we're looking at today, they gave these titles to Jesus, not to Caesar. And that was high treason. Many, not all, but many of the stories told about Jesus were told to outdo the stories that were told about Caesar. For example, the birth stories. To say that Jesus was born of a human virgin impregnated by God was to outdo the claim that Caesar was descended from the virgin goddess Aphrodite Venus and the Trojan hero. Okay. Now we're going to move into the living the miracle part of this talk. When Caesar became emperor, it was decided that on each year they would celebrate his birthday. And he was described as the Savior of the world, whose birth had brought peace to the world. Now we again applied those titles to Jesus. Savior of the world, who brings peace on the earth. So what Caesar offered, and what empires offer today, was war, victory, and peace. That's the order. War, victory, and peace. Of course, that order of things never leads to peace, just to another war. And I have never understood why any world leader would think, okay, we're going to kill all your citizens this time, and that will be the world to end all wars. We even have fought a war in this country with that title, the war to end all wars. Now, Jesus offered something different. He offered a world of nonviolence, justice, and peace. Not retributive justice, distributive justice. Nonviolence, justice, and peace. First, justice, then peace. The authentic Jesus teaching is not peace through war, but peace through justice. No matter how righteous we think our cause to be, and no matter how awful the actions of those we label our enemies, the trajectory of hatred always leads to one place: to become the very thing we hate. You know, every week, I didn't today, but I'll do it now. I begin by reminding you what ordinary life is all about. There are three things that I want ordinary life to be about. You should have these memorized by now. That we deepen our awareness and involvement in sacred mystery, that we grow in our understanding of our true identity, and that we gain in our willingness and skill at living kindness and generosity and compassion in the world. Now, you may think that my position is naive, but I do believe that if we could do this, and if we could influence more people to do this, we could live in a more humane world. We are in a mess in the outer world because we're in a mess in the inner world. And if not in a mess, I know nobody wants to think their inner world's a mess, then we can be so easily blind and befuddled. Once again, because most of us don't have Jewish backgrounds and because the story is so achingly familiar, we think we know it, just like we think we know ourselves. The Jewish people had an identity. And the identity was, we are God's people. Their theological story was that God had made a covenant with them that was even more intimate than marriage. And this metaphor is found all through the Hebrew Scriptures. It was not a private, individual, personal relationship like it became under the influence of Protestantism, under the influence of Martin Luther. Martin Luther came up with a priesthood of the believer, which led to an emphasis in evangelical Christianity of having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not against that. I think it's a good idea. It's just not what Jesus or his Jewish background knew or would recognize. The covenant was between a people and sacred mystery. The people and sacred mystery. And one of the major things this covenant emphasized was identity, communal identity. And that communal identity was shaped by two questions that the Jewish people raised over and over for themselves. Who are we? And how are we to live in the world? Who are we? And how are we to live in the world? So the religious and political leaders came to check and see where Jesus' allegiance was, and he said, let me see a coin. Whose image is on it? Whose image is engraved on it? And the obvious answer, of course, is Caesar's, and what was left unspoken but so clearly said that it was like a thunderclap was, let me see you. Whose image is engraved on you? So Jesus is teaching, be who you are. Don't either sell yourself short or sell yourself down the creek to some lesser identity. Now, I wish I had a nickel for every time I have heard somebody say about themselves or something they have done. Well, after all, I'm only human. Maybe you said that yourself. Being fully human means learning to live the image in which we are created. Being human is not an excuse for anything. Irenaeus of Lyons, France, now, who was born in the year 130, and it was in the place where he was a pastor and leader that the original Santiago pilgrimage began. Irenaeus says that the glory of God is a human being fully alive. That's a long time ago to come up with something like that. Now, one of the ways and places to see a fully alive human being is in Jesus. But we have to see him. Not as the Western Church created him, but rather as he was and is. At least we work to get as close to him and his teachings as possible. We want Jesus to be the way for us, not someone who gets in the way. Decades ago, when he was gaining notoriety as being exiled from his own country, the Dalai Lama asked religious leaders from the West. This was his preparation for the big council that he convenes on a fairly regular basis on spirituality, leaders from Eastern spirituality and from the West, both in the mental health field and religious field. He asked the people in the West, prior to their first meeting, what they thought was the contributing factor to most of the problems in the world. As they saw it, what causes the crime, the addiction, the violence, the abuse, so forth. And so all the religious leaders, psychological people from the West put their heads together. And they came up with an answer, which they gave the Dalai Lama, and they said, the root cause of all our problems is low self-esteem. And the Dalai Lama thought about that. And he said, how is that possible? Don't you people believe that you were made in the image of your Creator? How could you possibly think lowly of yourself? Gotcha. It's because we've gotten disconnected from the source of our true identity. We fall for the lies that tell us our egos are who we are. I love Jesus. He is so much fun to hang out with. I mean, really, he never answers any questions you ask him, and when he does, what he says is impossible to live. You think about some of the stories he told too much, and it drives you crazy, try to figure it out. That's why people flip so quickly from non-duality into believing stuff. It's just too hard. I just believe. Hey, Jesus, what do I have to do to be saved? Oh, it's a piece of cake. Just sell everything you have and come follow me. Are you serious? Okay, forget that. Love your enemy. I think I'll go fishing. Miracle to be lived. So even though I say I cannot do this non-duality into words, I don't stop trying. Here it is. It is the apparently paradoxical, contradictory, impossible to grasp with the dualistic mind aspects of something that makes it spiritual in the first place. We may not live in the Roman Empire, but we live in a culture where the religion is materialism and consumerism. And folks, if we don't find ways to cut loose from that, we're lost. This is why we need teachers, rituals, practices, places of accountability. The ego loves to wait and then ambush whatever it can for its own survival. And the ego loves to use religion for its own survival too. I mean, you are not out of the pages of the New Testament before Christians are killing each other. What's that about? And we're still doing it. Why? Because we pay allegiance to what should not be paid allegiance to. Now, in spite of the way it may sometimes seem in the way that I talk, I do believe we are in the midst of a great turning. I see it showing up in two ways. First, there is a growing desire for a more just and equitable society. I think that's the energy I felt last night at one parade route. And second, there is a desire, as represented by you and others like you, to learn about the inner journey. And I group these together by calling it the willingness to live into the miraculous. We live in such a wondrous universe. Even at the dualistic level, this is becoming more and more apparent. 50 years ago, we could not have imagined the kind of breakthroughs that we would have today in every arena. From the vast cosmological level that we learned about from Ilya Delio, all the way to quantum physics and what's happening neurologically, the most minute levels. And these two growing desires, social and mystical, are interconnected. You can't separate them from each other. We have to explore them simultaneously. One affects the others. There is so much about ourselves and our inner hidden depths that can only be discovered by living with others, by experiencing the contact with personality very different from our own. And yet what's happening, particularly in our society, is that we're grouping up into like groups more and more with more tightly drawn boundaries. It's equally true that we cannot hope to understand or change society unless we also understand and work to change ourselves. There's nothing in the outer world that's not created inwardly first. whatever the human heart at its deepest and most unconscious levels conceives or imagines for good or ill is eventually going to get manifested in the outer world. Let me see you. Whose image is engraved on you? Let me see you. How do you do that? What Jesus knew, what the mystics of every age knew and know, is that any question about God is also a question about humans. I want to say that again. What the mystics of every age knew and know is that any question about God is also a question about the human. It's no use saying I have a personal relationship with Jesus if our actions, either as individuals or a group, show that we live lives that are alienated from love or alienate others from the experience of love. Let me see you. Whose image is engraved on you? So, what does it mean to live a miracle? Well, I'm sure there are many answers to that. I have a few things that I think. I think to live a miracle, for one thing, means being open to mystery. The word mysticism simply means you can't talk about this. I do. But really, most of us, this is projection, but most of us have some degree of fear or dread when approaching that which is unknown. All right? And yet, whatever we may mean when we use the word God is unknowable. I think another thing it means to live a miracle is to give in to an adventure. Sacred mystery in whose image we are created cannot be pinned down, controlled, or predicted. And sadly, the God of Western Christianity has become tame, docile, entirely safe. This is not the God of Jesus. A third thing it means to live a miracle is to live into the truth. Two little boys were talking about serious matters, and one said to the other, "You believe in the devil?" "I used to," said his companion, "but I don't anymore." "Why is that?" "Well, I figured it out. The devil's just like Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. He's your daddy." I'm going to talk about this next week, but I'll just give you a teaser about that. Sometimes when I talk to people about God, they will say, "Well, we don't know God, can't know God." True, and everything we projected on God is a human projection. Also true. We have projected from the beginning our lives, and from many places and all sorts of things, on whatever we mean when we use the word God. And truth requires that we withdraw those projections. And I think this withdrawal must be done with great care and great delicacy so that we are not left in the end in a hopeless vacuum, but with even a deeper truth. The deeper truth that Jesus taught was and is that God is love. And it is in that image of love that we are created and called to live. So I want to offer you again, now in light of this talk, my favorite quote from Meister Eckhart. I've been reading Cyprian Smith's book on Meister Eckhart along with some other stuff. And I've tried to read a lot of original translations of Meister Eckhart stuff, and he's not easy to read. But Cyprian Smith offers some good translations. At any rate, years ago I found this quote by Meister Eckhart. And you know something about him. We don't know a lot about him. He was a preacher. He was also an administrator in the church. Meister is not a name, it's simply a title that we would give somebody like Mr. We don't know a lot about him. But he preached these sermons on a regular basis that were just gems of non-duality. And in one of those sermons, he said, "The eye with which I see God is the eye with which God sees me." Now think about it. The eye with which I see God is the eye with which God sees me. And then keep that in mind. And then hear Jesus ask this. Let me see you. In whose image are you made? No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargo, so watch your step, and I will see you here next week. Thank you.